It's the middle of October, so you know what that means in the NFL. It's trade season. There's teams that are a piece away and trying to acquire a big name. There's teams that are ready to blow it up after having horrible starts and they're trying to get off some players. And there's rumors circulating everywhere about some big name guys that could be moving on. But one of the biggest rumors that hit the internet today was the fact that NFL insiders are hearing that Julio Jones and even Matt Ryan could potentially get shopped before the trade deadline. And it also looks like it's officially Tua time in Miami. So we're going to talk about all that today. If you're new to the channel and you're interested in more videos like this, make sure to subscribe, turn on the bell icon so that you never miss any of these uploads. Now, I already know what my guys are thinking, my loyal guys that are here every day. Eric, this isn't Madden content. What are you doing? Well, we all know Madden 21 isn't the greatest. It's kind of boring. I honestly don't want to upload Madden 21 content every day. So let's talk about some NFL stuff, which is, the closest thing related to Madden. And right now, some big talks going on about potentially Julio Jones and even Matt Ryan being traded. And that's crazy. And me as a Saints fan, obviously, obviously I don't like the Falcons. They're our biggest rival. But when you look at the Falcons over the past few years, something that has been really crazy about the team is they've had a lot of talent. I won't necessarily say they were like in win now mode, but they were a team that should have been better than they were. They should have been making the playoffs more consistently. After, they blew that huge Super Bowl a few years back, they've just been on this downward spiral. And this year, the worst that it's been. They started 0-5. They finally fired Dan Quinn, which was something they probably should have did at least last year, but they just kept holding on to him. And then they finally got their first win of the season last week. But the truth remains, they've had a lot of talent on that team over the past few years. Matt Ryan has been one of the better quarterbacks of the last decade. No, he hasn't been like a top 2 guy, a top 3 guy, but he was just an MVP a few years ago. He was one of the top guys just a few years ago, and even when he wasn't at that peak, he's always been at that second best tier, like the top of that second best tier. He'd usually be behind the guys like Rodgers and Brady, and Drew Brees when Drew Brees was more at his peak. But right behind those guys, you had the guys like Matt Ryan, like Matthew Stafford, good quarterbacks, guys that, some teams would kill to have. Like, look at the QBs the Jets have been dealing with. Look at the QBs the Browns have been dealing with, the Bears for the last 10, 20 years for some of these teams. Those teams would kill for a Matt Ryan. When you look at his numbers, you look at what he's done, if his team didn't blow that Super Bowl, if the coaching staff, played it a little better down the stretch, if the defense didn't completely get annihilated down the stretch, right? Matt Ryan would have a Super Bowl along with his MVP, and he'd probably be like a lock for the Hall of Fame, honestly. So Matt Ryan's a good QB. Julio Jones has been one of the best receivers we've ever seen. I think he's got to at least be top 10 all time at this point. Definitely one of the best of the last decade. Probably the best of the last decade. You think of him and Calvin Johnson. And then you look at some of the other pieces his team has had, Devonta Freeman when he was, a few years back when he was really good. They got Calvin Ridley right now alongside Julio Jones, who is very good. On the defense, you got Grady Jarrett, one of the better defensive players in NFL. Deion Jones, you've had, obviously they've had some injuries some years as well, but they've had a lot of collective good talent, and that's why they made a Super Bowl just a few short years ago. But it looks like it might finally be time to blow it all up for the Falcons, even though they still have a decent amount of talent. But at this point, they fired the coach. It's kind of that start over time. So I can see why these rumors are circulating. But the key here is, would they actually trade both of these guys? I don't think so. I think if anybody would get traded, it would be Julio for multiple reasons. Number one, the quarterback position is a little bit more important, obviously. The shelf life of a quarterback's a little bit longer, typically. Julio Jones is getting a little bit more up in age. He has been kind of having some injuries as of late. Nothing major, but, they have been some concerns. Then you have Calvin Ridley, who's the young stud, who's looking like a number 1 receiver. He's finally kind of emerging into that role now. But Julio Jones is still talented enough to really help a team that's ready to contend right now. The one key problem here is his contract is one of those contracts. It's a hard contract to trade, but again, if the right team is looking for that piece, and there's definitely some teams that are looking for that stud receiver, the biggest question is can he stay healthy, or is he going to have these lingering injuries, for the rest of the year that's kept him out of a couple games? And would a team want to take on that contract if they feel like they could win now? I think it's definitely a possibility. With Matt Ryan, I don't think they would trade him. I think if any way they would maybe walk away from him at a certain point. I don't think they're going to trade him. I still think, if you're looking to rebuild, Matt Ryan might still have a few good years left. But again, it depends. If this team winds up in a top 2 position in this draft, you've got Trevor Lawrence, you've got Justin Fields. You might want to just start it all over because you're going to have a new coaching regime coming in. It just might be that time to blow it up because this team has kind of just missed their window, right? The Matt Ryan, Julio Jones Falcons, it just seems like they've missed their window, and it makes sense that they would want to start over. So what are some teams, or who are some teams that would actually want to trade for Julio Jones? I think there's a few interesting names that come up. A lot of people have been speculating that a team that would try to trade for him would potentially be the Ravens, because when you look at how great the Ravens are, right? They were dominant last season. They obviously won and done in the playoffs, but Lamar Jackson, he's gonna, barring injury or some kind of crazy downfall, he's going to be a legit, threat at that QB position, a top QB for at least the next few years, right? You hope the next 10 years, but you would have to say, he does run, so he's going to get hit a little bit more. That could affect his history or his future, right? But, you have to think at least 5 to 7 years of good quarterbacking out of that. You've got a good little crop of running backs. You've got a really good defense with a lot of young players. But the one thing the team really doesn't have is a true stud receiver. You've got Hollywood Brown, who's a good speedster, second year, but he hasn't shown that he's that true number 1 just yet. You've got a good crop of tight ends as well, and you got Willie Snead. You've got okay receivers, but you don't have a Julio Jones. And most teams don't have a Julio Jones. There's only a few teams that have a guy of anywhere close to that caliber, but the Ravens, as of right now, don't even have a second tier top receiver, right? Because Hollywood Brown isn't that guy just yet. He could be eventually, but he's not there yet. Julio Jones is the one thing that team could need to put them completely over the top, to give them firepower to really be able to deal with the likes of a Kansas City and things like that. So that is definitely an interesting team. The Packers are also an extremely interesting team because they have come back firing this year. They've been looking great. They obviously just got beat up by the Bucks, but sometimes you just run into a bad week. But up until that point, Aaron Rodgers looking like he's definitely kind of found that fountain of youth a little bit. They've been tearing it up, and they need another receiver. Davante Adams is a stud, don't get me wrong, but outside of him, it's not very good. You got Allen Lazard, not the worst in the world, but it ain't a Julio Jones. Now, I don't know if they'd be able to make this one work, but just imagine Julio Jones and Davante Adams side by side, and you already look at a team that, defensively, they're not a bad defense. Aaron Rodgers is still one of the top QBs. Aaron Jones has been a beast out of the backfield. You add Julio to that mix, and I think you would have to think the Packers would be the favorites in the NFC if they could add Julio Jones. Right now, they're still one of the favorites. Obviously, the Bucks have been clicking, so they might be the overall favorite at the moment, but of course the Seahawks as well. But man, if you could add Julio Jones to the Packers, they would probably be the clear-cut favorites until otherwise. Another interesting team, I don't really think this would happen, but this is an interesting team I've seen people bring up, and that is the Dolphins, right? Because the Dolphins actually don't look that bad. And even last year when they were bad, they were fighting. They were in games. They were competing a lot. Brian Flores looks like a very good head coach. It looks like the players really respect him, and he gets everything out of his guys. And the Dolphins do not look bad. A lot of things are panning out for them, and we're going to talk about Tua in a minute, but they could definitely use a Julio Jones. Now, don't get me wrong, Devontae Parker kind of came on strong last year. He's a legit receiver, but outside of him, you got Preston Williams, who's not bad either. But again, a guy like Julio Jones could really take this roster to the next level. But the only thing with Miami is I know they're not in win now mode. They could potentially make the playoffs this year the way they're looking, but they're not quite Super Bowl ready. And I think for Julio Jones to take on that contract, you need to be like the Ravens or the Packers, who are Super Bowl ready. That brings me to another team that I think potentially could be, but I don't know if they're 100% Super Bowl ready either, and that's the Raiders, because the Raiders are looking pretty good as well. Obviously, John Gruden's trying to get back to that Super Bowl. They've got some talent on the team. They've got a decent receiving core as well. It's definitely not to be slept on, but again, they don't have a Julio Jones, and I'm just not quite sure that they're Super Bowl ready yet either. they're looking like it could be a year or two away, so I don't know if they would take on that Julio Jones contract. So that's why I think the Ravens and Packers are the two most interesting teams here. You've also got the 49ers. The 49ers are always an interesting team. They're a team that's definitely not afraid to make a move if it makes sense. And when you look at their receiving core, they've got some good guys out there. You got Deebo Samuel, the rookie Brandon Ayuk, but they're not like true number one, like, you know, go up and get the ball receivers, right? Those are guys that they're good in the run game. They're good, you know, with some of the gadget stuff. They're, you know, they catch the ball and make plays as well, but they're not that true, you know, go up and get the ball. The true number one receiver on that team is George Kittle, and typically you don't want the tight end to be your number one receiver. If you could pair Julio with Kittle, that would be pretty crazy. But those are the teams that really just kind of come to mind, in my opinion. What do you guys think? Let me know below what you think could happen there. And then on to Tua Tagovailoa. He came in the game late last week when they were up 24-0, threw a couple passes, completed them, and then today they come out and say he's going to be the starter moving forward, which shocked everybody. Nobody saw this coming because, number one, like we just said, the Dolphins aren't really in a win-now mode. They might make the playoffs. Fitzpatrick was actually playing really solid. Again, the team as a whole was just playing good football, but they're not a team that's going to win the Super Bowl this year, and I don't even think their own coach or front office, you know, expects that, right? So why would you throw Tua in so soon when everything else is clicking, when Fitzpatrick's playing good, and when Tua, you don't have to rush him in, kind of throw him to the wolves? Well, what they came out and said was basically the plan always was when they felt Tua was ready, he was going to start, no matter what the record was, no matter how good Fitzpatrick was playing, because Fitzpatrick could be having the best season of a QB in the NFL this year. Even if that was the case, he is not the long-term answer there. He is not the guy that's going to bring them to a Super Bowl down the line. It's just not going to pan out that way unless some kind of miracle happen. So they were looking at it like, when we feel like Tua is ready for the responsibility, no matter where we're at, we're putting him in there, because they have to know that they're not winning a Super Bowl with Fitzpatrick, right? If they make the playoffs, cool, but the playoffs at this point for the Dolphins would just be getting some of these young guys experience, and for even Tua, that would be a good thing. They feel that he is now actually ready from whatever they've been seeing, you know, outside of the games, right? In practice and you know, at the facilities. And then he came in, you know, for a few plays that don't really mean much, but they feel that he's ready now, and they're about to throw him in there and let him take the reins. A lot of people are surprised by this, myself included, but I don't really think it's a bad thing. I think that it's going to get him more experience. This is not, like, again, a season that the Dolphins are planning to really win anything. So any experience they can get him is going to make it better for him going into next year, where the Dolphins could be poised to actually make a more serious run if they can build on what they're doing right now, which is playing good football. So Tua time is officially here in Miami. I know a lot of people are probably excited to watch it. I know I am. Let me know what you think below. Hope you enjoyed this video. As always, I will see you guys next time.